Hello, I'm Jan Szrewiński. Welcome on board the Eastern Express, and as always, I hope you enjoy the journey. Imagine building the world's tallest dam and then running out of money halfway through. That is Tajikistan's Rogun Dam, a $9 billion mega project, 2 turbines working, 4 missing, and now the World Bank is getting cold feet. For Dushanbe, this is supposed to be the country's economic future, but with financing frozen, rising debts and millions downstream fearing for their water, the future looks less like a power surge and more like a blackout. So without further ado, let's take a look at our latest report to find out more.
This is Tajikistan's flagship infrastructure project, the Rogun Dam and hydropower plant. Located on the Vaksh River, it is meant to provide a solution to not only the country's but the entire region's ongoing energy crisis. Now, however, its fate hangs in the balance. Citing concerns over financing strategies on sustainable debt and safety protocols, the World Bank has frozen key funding for the project. The bank has said that unless its conditions are met, the money will not flow. There have been also many environmental concerns over the project, with experts warning about it impacting the Amu Darya river flow, which would lead to intensified desertification. As it stands, the project poses a serious economic risk to Tajikistan. Although its importance is not questioned, given the controversial management, one cannot help but consider whether the risks outweigh the benefits.
The goal of this project is to provide electricity not only to Tajikistan, but also to the countries of Central Asia and rationalize the availability of water in the region.
The dam's construction began in 1976 under the Soviet Union, but was suspended during Tajikistan's civil war. There were some efforts to restart the project in the 2000s, but those had mostly failed. It wasn't until 2016 that the project was relaunched with support from the World Bank. To complete this venture, Tajikistan must secure $6.4 billion in new funding, 40% of the country's entire projected GDP for 2025.
And now we're zoning in on the East-splaining portion of our show. Central Asia as a region is grappling with a serious problem: access to clean, safe water. The impact this crisis has cannot be understated, as it affects everything from the economy to basic healthcare and could even lead to clashes over water sources.
One of the areas most affected by the water crisis is the cotton industry. In Tajikistan, for example, abnormal rainfall and poor crops resulting from water shortage and other factors have led to this once booming industry to become unprofitable. But this is only one case out of hundreds in the region. The water crisis has several sources, such as the constantly shrinking Aral Sea, which in the past had been a massive source of water that powered local economies and tourism. In Kyrgyzstan, a third of the rural population does not have access to safe drinking water, a figure that is only expected to rise in the coming decades. Waterborne diseases and various infections have become commonplace among these communities. In Uzbekistan, the water shortage has been having a severe impact on the country's agricultural sector. Areas such as the Fergana Valley, Uzbekistan's agricultural heartland, is dependent on unreliable deliveries from transboundary rivers, which could become contested in the future. Experts from organizations such as the United Nations or the World Bank are confident that these problems can be solved and this trend reversed, but that they will require international cooperation and action on phenomena such as climate change itself.
And now it's time for a journey to Central Asia to look at the issue in greater detail. A concrete colossus has become both a national dream and an international headache. The Rogun Dam would tower at 335 meters, making it the tallest dam in the world. To put that in perspective, that is taller than the Eiffel Tower. It is more than an engineering project. It is a symbol of Tajikistan's ambitions to secure energy independence, export electricity to neighbors, and finally step out from under the shadow of its Soviet past. But right now, instead of making history, Rogun is making headlines for all the wrong reasons. According to reports, the World Bank has decided to freeze funding for the project under certain conditions. Tajikistan must come up with a credible financing plan, keep its debt under control, and prove the dam can actually make money once it's completed. In other words, Dushanbe has to show the world that it isn't just a vanity project. The World Bank originally approved a $350 million grant for Rogun in 2024, money meant to push construction forward. But critics immediately warned that the project was environmentally risky and economically shaky. Activists pointed out that the Amu Darya River, which is the lifeline of Central Asia, could lose up to a quarter of its water flow if Rogun runs at full power. That could endanger up to 10 million people in Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan who depend on the river for farming, drinking water and survival. And where it gets even more complicated, Tajik officials argue that Rogun is the key to their future. You see, the dam could provide Tajikistan with reliable electricity and bring in revenue from power exports to Afghanistan, Pakistan and beyond. But the project ignores how there are already shrinking water supplies in the entire region. The dam might solve one country's problems while creating massive ones for its neighbors. And let's not forget the economics. Rogun's price tag has ballooned to $9 billion, a staggering sum for a country whose entire GDP in 2025 is projected at just over $16 billion. Standard & Poor's recently described the project as, and I quote, crowding out other domestic capital expenditure, end of quote. Translation: Tajikistan is pouring so much money into concrete that it risks starving the rest of its economy. Mortgaging almost half of your economy for a single project and then watching your main financier step back, well, that's where Tajikistan stands today. If the bank backs away, Rogun risks stalling indefinitely or forcing Dushanbe into riskier deals with less transparent lenders. And here's the big question. Can Tajikistan really afford to keep chasing this dream? 2 turbines are already spinning, and about $3 billion has already been sunk into this project. That makes it hard to walk away. Politically, Rogun has become too important for the Tajik leadership to abandon without losing their face. The Rogun Dam, instead of being a source of light, could actually become a source of conflict. And now here to shed more light on the story is Bruce Pannier, board member at the Caspian Policy Center. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Good to have you with us today. And the first question, let's make it an open one. The situation around the dam in Tajikistan, would you say that it could actually have international ramifications as well, given that there are countries downstream which are not exactly thrilled by the prospect of this dam being completed?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And this has been one of the problems since the early days. Early days. This is a Soviet-era project. However, for going back like 2 decades, Uzbekistan, which is the next country downstream from where this, from Tajikistan, has been voicing concerns about what's going to happen. How long it's going to take to fill up this reservoir, how much water they're going to have to siphon off for that, how much water they'll have to keep in that, what happens during drought years if they have to keep that dam filled so that they can run the hydropower plant. Those concerns were tempered a little bit after Shavkat Mirziyoyev became the president of Uzbekistan, but now they're back. Climate change, less precipitation, and let's face it, this project has been really ill-fated. That's a kind way of putting it since the very start. So besides the environmental problems that people are worried about, it's had a number of financial problems, delays. I mean, the list goes on and on here.
So there is an Italian company that's working on this project. It is intended to be massive once this is completed. 300 meters. That is quite substantial. A part of it apparently is already online. But would you really say that there is compelling evidence that once it is fully operational, it could actually spell an environmental disaster for territories located downstream, including both domestically, but also, as we've already indicated, in other countries in Central Asia?
Yeah, well, absolutely. As you pointed out, this is going to be the tallest dam in the world at 335 meters. It's in an earthquake zone. So there's concerns about that. They've been filling up the dam now for about 18 years, I guess it hasn't. It hasn't caused huge problems yet, but they've only got it to the level where it can run two of the turbines. So it still needs to have more water put in it. Now, again, I know I'd mentioned climate change, but there's another thing coming into play here very soon, too, and that's the fact that the Taliban, of course, are building this Koch Tepe Canal, which is also going to take water from the same river that this dam is on. If you're Uzbekistan or Turkmenistan and you're downstream, you're looking at having a significant reduction of water in the coming years. I mean, anywhere between 25 and 40% of the water you're getting is going to be gone. And let's look at a little bit further down what was downriver, downstream from this. I mean, that river fed the Aral Sea. It doesn't reach the Aral Sea anymore, and the Aral Sea, of course, is 90% dried up. So, if you're between the dam, the Taliban's canal, you're looking at displacing hundreds of thousands of people probably downstream, and that might be a conservative estimate too. So yes, it's a time bomb, an environmental time bomb waiting to go off at this point.
So let's break it down a bit, actually. You've mentioned this is located in an earthquake zone. Have there been any disasters of considerable magnitude before, which could indicate that the damage to the structure could be substantial if something like this happened?
Well, I mean, there was just an earthquake in Afghanistan yesterday. It was a reminder. It was away from the Central Asian border, but it's another reminder of what can happen. Now, there's a lake in eastern Tajikistan called Lake Sarez. A little more than 100 years ago, it wasn't even there. They had a huge earthquake, and so many rocks and dirt fell in and blocked the exit of the river that was there that it's now a significant sized lake. But this is a reminder of what can happen. I mean, the area does get large earthquakes. They happen infrequently, perhaps, but still, they have happened over history. And we'd only have to look at this Lake Sarez to understand that, 1911, big earthquake hits, it dams up this valley to the point where it fills up with water. If you do the reverse process of that, something like that hits this retaining wall that they're building for the Rogun hydropower plant and breaks it, then not only first you lose the water downstream, and then all of a sudden you run the risk that massive amounts of water will come flooding down into your territory and wipe away farmland and houses and people, of course, too. So it's been a risky venture from the start. And, it really, like I said, when I called it a time bomb, that's a fair description of what we're looking at here, because sooner or later there is going to be an earthquake in that area. And whether it's going to, will it be big enough to break the dam wall? We don't know, but still, there's certainly historical precedent for large-scale earthquakes that leveled Tashkent in 1966, that leveled Ashgabat, the Turkmen capital, in 1948. So, like I said, it's not really a question of if as it is of when.
So this doesn't actually inspire confidence, but coming back to the man-made aspects of this debacle, can the countries which might suffer as a result of this construction have recourse to international law? Does the international law provide any sort of remedies for countries affected in that way?
This is a complicated question. Like I said, Uzbekistan used to be against this. Under their first president, Islam Karimov, they were 100% against it. And Karimov even warned, without naming the Rogun Dam specifically or Tajikistan, that mismanagement of water resources could be the reason for war in Central Asia. Uzbekistan did everything they could under Karimov to hold this up. They stopped construction supplies from reaching Tajikistan. All that everything that they could think of to do to slow this down, and it still kept progressing forward. So obviously there was at least then, Uzbekistan didn't see any legal means of stopping this dam. Now, part of the problem with it is that this project has gone so far ahead now, and it's got funding from other sources too. So we have to remember the Saudi Development Fund is putting in $100 million. The Islamic Development Bank is putting in $250 million. Qatar just signed a deal to put in $50 more million. EBRD has shown some interest in this. The Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, which is led by China, has also said that they're willing to put in money in this. So it's got a lot of money behind it. It has a lot of momentum too, because it is partially built at this point. Uzbekistan has, under the current president, has actually said they were willing to help this. And in fact, just in July, they signed a long-term contract to get electricity from the Rogun hydropower plant when it starts operation, which optimistically is going to happen in 2035. So, there's so much behind this right now that to try to stop it would be very difficult. And like I said, there doesn't seem to be a legal means of halting construction of this dam at the moment. And it's certainly got a number of international supporters that are behind it and financing it. So you can't really imagine that they would all of a sudden say, okay, we're going to stop after all this time and after all the, more than $3 billion poured into construction, we're just going to stop the project. It won't happen, I don't think.
Would you say that this, once again, directs the spotlight onto the question of the availability of water as a major strategic resource? I mean, we've already had tensions over the management of a river, and that was Ethiopia and Egypt. When Ethiopia built its dam, Egypt was protesting because this essentially put about 100 million people at risk if the water from the Nile suddenly was redirected and was no longer available for agriculture. So would you say that this is like the new type of a flashpoint, countries fighting over resources, water resources, even to the point of hostilities?
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be a big problem for Central Asia. I mean, we've talked about climate change, the decrease in precipitation, melting glaciers, of course, in Central Asia, growing population. Central Asia's population today is about 80 million people. 120 years ago was 8 million. So it's going to, sooner or later, this is going to be an issue. And again, I mentioned the Koch-Tepe Canal that they're building in Afghanistan. That's already going to displace, it's certainly tens of thousands of people and probably hundreds of thousands in Central Asia. Now we got the Rogun Dam. At the moment, the atmosphere is one of cooperation in Central Asia, but one can easily foresee a day, 20 or 30 years down the road, when the population of Central Asia is 100 million. There's even less water than there is today. And, if there's some mismanagement or construction on the Rogun Dam, if they have problems, if there's 4 or 5 years of drought in a row and this dam upstream is conserving water for use for electrical generation, then, of course, the downstream countries, and in the case of Uzbekistan, it's a much larger country than Tajikistan, are going to be very concerned about what's going on up there. And then there could easily be some tension, and it might lead to conflict.
So for the time being, at least, the governments of these countries are okay with the project. Well, it remains to be seen what happens next. A very quick question, because we're running out of time. Why didn't Tajikistan actually invest in its own fossil fuel resources? It does have the deposits. However, it's not really using them. Instead, it keeps importing gas and oil from abroad. Wouldn't that have helped diversify?
Well, Tajikistan really doesn't have much in the way of oil or natural gas. I mean, they were drilling. In fact, they drilled the deepest well in the world trying to find gas, was 6,000 meters deep or something, and they still couldn't find any significant amounts of gas. They do have a huge amount of coal, but, in this day and age, you hate to be dependent upon coal. That said, Tajikistan actually does burn a huge amount of coal. But for years, they've been advised by numerous organizations to develop their hydropower potential. The problem, I think, perhaps with Rogun is not so much that Tajikistan is developing its hydropower potential, but that it decided to build this massive hydropower plant. I mean, if Rogun is ever completed, it will be able to generate as much electricity as 3 nuclear reactors, right? But it's clean energy. So, again, a lot of people were saying this is the way to go, but I don't think they wanted them to do something like that. You could build a series of smaller hydropower projects that would have less impact on the environment and wouldn't run the kind of risks that we're seeing at Rogun, that are the potential risks that Rogun has with it. So not so much a question of developing the hydropower potential as is of this specific project seems to be ill-advised. It's like I said, it's a massive undertaking, and there's a number of problems that could arise with this and already have arisen with it. And so they would have been much better off if they could have built smaller hydropower projects that were generating 500 megawatts or 1,000 megawatts rather than this behemoth that's going to generate supposedly 3,600 megawatts.
So it's green energy, but it's leaving others green with envy. If only with envy, though. I mean, as you said, there are more serious concerns there, possibly a source of tension further down the road. Bruce Pannier was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your insight.
Thank you for the invitation.
And now we're moving on to Eastern News Flash, a series of all the other stories from the East that you absolutely don't want to miss. US President Donald Trump is in talks with European allies about deploying American private military contractors to Ukraine as a potential security guarantee for Kyiv. The move is positioned as a workaround to Trump's campaign pledge of not sending US troops into Ukraine.
These private military contractors, also referred to as mercenaries, would play the role of builders. Frontline defences, new military bases and fortifications along defensive lines are just a few of the responsibilities the mercenaries would take on during their mission in Ukraine. The move is also reportedly part of a broader Western security framework that would see thousands of European troops deployed to Ukraine, air policing missions, and Black Sea operations backed by US intelligence, logistics and command support if a ceasefire between Kyiv and Moscow is reached.
The Georgian government has frozen the accounts of 7 leading pro-European NGOs in the country, claiming they're engaged in activities directed against the constitutional order and the national security of Georgia. This follows the setting of a deadline by the EU to roll back authoritarian legislation aimed at keeping the ruling Georgian Dream Party in power by the 31st of August.
The government Tbilisi argues that these NGOs were financially supporting acts of sabotage and violent protests by funding equipment used by the protesters, namely gas masks and goggles. The affected organizations claim that they have not received any prior notice of any investigation being launched by the Georgian Dream. International onlookers such as Amnesty International, the European Union, and the UN Special Rapporteur for Human Rights Defenders have denounced the Georgian government for the move, calling it a violation of human rights. The asset freeze is another in a string of actions by the Georgian Dream Party targeting independent media, NGOs and opposition parties, which have hindered Tbilisi's path towards EU membership, a goal that Georgians have been working towards for a very long time.
And for this episode of Eastern Express, it's the end of the line. Please stay with us here on TVP World for more latest news and updates.